Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of 10 Steps to Help Your Church Grow. In this episode, we're going to talk about programming, and this is the one that I struggled with the most in terms of figuring out where to put it in the series. We've been looking in this section on drafting plans sort of chronologically. You have to start with vision, and then once you have a vision, you can reorient things around it. And so programming fits pretty naturally after that as kind of a major expression of reorientation. In order to fully understand programming and how we're going to reorient it, it would actually probably be useful to cover the 3 steps on building disciples first. But in terms of process, it makes sense to put it here. So I put it here, and if there are parts that don't make sense, hopefully by the time you get to the end of the series, they will. It might not hurt to come back and rewatch this one after you've finished the 3 videos that follow. I'll leave that up to you, whether or not you want to do that. But I think that even without covering those first, there's a good deal that we can say and understand about programming and how we address that. So let me start by explaining what I mean by programming. It is a very broad category, by which I mean any program that the church is doing. So this would include Sunday morning worship. It would include Sunday school and youth group and small groups and Bible studies, food pantries or soup kitchens, clothes closet, any program that the church is doing. That's why it's called programming. And truthfully, I would also include committees in this as well. Whether it's trustees or a missions committee or whatever committees your church happens to have, I would include that as part of our programming as well. But our programming is what we're doing. It's the activities we're undertaking, and those are part of what we were talking about in the last episode with reorientation. Oftentimes, too often in our churches, our programming has become kind of a loosely defined set of things that we do because we've been doing them, or maybe just things that somebody had a vision for and they were tenacious enough that they got permission. And there's usually very little focus, oftentimes very little communication. It's just stuff that we're doing. And part of reorienting ourselves as a church is to try to be a bit more purposeful about the programming that we're doing. It's about thinking through what we're undertaking. Why are we doing these things? Having a vision allows us to have some degree of objectiveness in evaluating how valuable programs are, how successful programs are. If a church doesn't have a clear vision of where they're headed, there's no way to evaluate the merit or the success of the programming, aside from whether or not you have it. If there's no clear vision that you're headed towards, the only measure of success for Sunday school is whether you have Sunday school classes or not. If your vision is to have a certain number of people in the pews, maybe you can evaluate your Sunday school department's effectiveness on how many kids show up or how many classes you're running. But in order to really gauge the effectiveness in ministry of a church's programs, you have to have a vision for where you're headed. You have to have an end goal in mind. You have to have something that you're trying to accomplish so you can evaluate how successful or effective various ministries are for what you're headed towards. In an ideal world, every single program that a church is doing, you should be able to define how it's furthering the mission of the church. You should be able to define how it's helping the church live into its vision. And you should be able to evaluate how effectively it's doing that. And in an ideal world, that evaluation should become the means by which you evaluate and prioritize your ministries. A ministry that is not effective at moving you towards your goal should be prioritized below those that are. And in fact, if a ministry is known to be ineffective, it should either be changed or eliminated to make room to free up resources to try new things that might be effective. I say in a perfect world because we all know how attached we become to different ministries. Things that were effective in shaping us, things that we feel passionate about, whether they're effective or not. I am not naive enough to suggest that you just start eliminating ineffective ministries. You will hurt people's feelings. You will alienate the volunteers who have been overseeing those things. We need to exercise grace and patience. Ministries that aren't currently effective can or maybe should be given the opportunity to be tweaked and to look for ways to allow them to become more effective if there are people who still feel passionately about them. Ministries that people have grown weary of doing can be eliminated, but even that should be done carefully because you never know who's sitting in the pews loving that ministry and not understanding that it's been ineffective. And so as you begin the process of evaluating how effective ministries are, it's good to be open and honest about that. If you find ministries that people are weary of doing and are ineffective, you should share that information gracefully and lovingly with a congregation so that if there are people who feel passionately about that ministry, they have the opportunity to step up and say, hey, I really don't think we should give up on that. And then maybe you can work with that person to find ways to make it more efficient and to transition them into leadership there. If you don't have people who are passionate about specific ministries, you should think about maybe not doing them. There are certain things that you may have to do. You have to have trustees. You have to have certain leadership teams. If nobody on them is passionate about them, I would definitely encourage you to look for new people who would be. But in terms of the Sunday school classes and small groups and Bible studies and outreaches and feeding and clothing people and all of those ministries, they are all good things, but churches have limited resources. And it's important for us to be mindful of how effective ministries are in moving us towards our vision of who God is calling us to be. It's important for us to orient or reorient our resources around becoming who God has called us to be. And that has to be done tactfully and lovingly, but think through the programming, even though we're not going to just eliminate a bunch of stuff and start over. Usually, if your church is in dire straits and you think that people might be open to it, have an honest conversation about it right away. Because if you're really nearing the end of your church's life cycle, you have a limited window to do some significant restructuring. You might not have time to do this tactfully. If your church is still relatively healthy, but you're recognizing that you're in decline and looking for opportunities to turn things around, you can afford to be a bit more patient and a bit more tactful with this process. However you're going to approach it, you need to start orienting things around the vision, like we talked about in the last video. And that means evaluating your programming, figuring out which things are consistent with the vision that you as a church have discerned, figuring out which things God has provided capable, passionate leadership for, figuring out how you can tweak things to make them more effective, how you can free up room and resources for new things. We need to walk through that process, and it's going to be challenging sometimes. But if we can do a good job of managing the conflict that arises, if we can continue to foster a healthy church culture that's going to give us room to try new things, that's going to give us grace when new things don't work well, that will help us to be more trusting in transitions, and not to think ill of people who are trying to change my ministry, but to recognize that these people are trying to come alongside and help make my ministry more effective. As we foster those things and work through this process of examining our programming and asking what is its function, how effective is it, how can we best use the limited resources that we as a congregation have, as we work through that, as we shape our programming around our mission of making disciples, it's going to breed new effectiveness. It's going to foster a new efficiency. And if we are successful at helping people find things that they care about, and successful in showing them how these ministries are helping us move towards a goal that they care about, they're going to enjoy volunteering more. They're going to be more interested in investing time and energy into things. Again, when we're moving towards a goal that people have in mind, that people are invested in seeing happen, they are quicker to jump in and get involved. They tend to enjoy it more. And so we oftentimes can find that with a little bit of pruning, not only can the programming that we're holding on to do better, but it creates room for new volunteer opportunities. It creates room for new programming that we've never tried before. And as we align all those things towards one goal, we're going to see a lot more movement. We're going to see a lot more success. So it won't be easy, but it's worthwhile. Get to work on figuring out your church's programming.